Alex Cooper stood at the living room door, his hand gripping the doorknob tightly, listening to the strange sounds coming from inside. The dim light from the chandelier above cast long shadows across the floor, stretching his own silhouette onto the cold tiles. He swallowed hard, an uneasy feeling rising in his chest. What was happening? Why did it feel like something was wrong? In all the years of his marriage to Claire, he had never felt so uncertain. She was the woman he had loved since he was a young man. They had weathered countless ups and downs together, and now, as things seemed to finally be settling down, he felt a shift he couldn't explain. The sweet moments they once shared seemed to have vanished, replaced instead by a heavy silence between them. Today, after a long day at work, Alex had tried to get home earlier, hoping to make amends with Claire, the woman he had always cherished. But when he arrived, the sense of unease only deepened. There was no sound of Claire's laughter, no hurried footsteps as she usually rushed to greet him when she heard his car pull into the driveway. Everything in the house was eerily quiet. Just a few more steps, and he would face the truth he didn't want to admit. His heart sank, though he tried to fight it, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had discovered in the past few days. The suspicious messages, the missed calls, the nights Claire didn't come home on time. Little things, which at first seemed insignificant, now gnawed at him like never before. Then, suddenly, a soft sigh floated from within. Was Claire in there, alone, or was someone else with her? The door seemed to hint at something Alex wasn't ready to face. He stood motionless, staring at the empty space before him, as though time itself had suddenly frozen, devoid of any sound. The feeling of being watched, of being betrayed, hit him hard, suffocating him with its weight. Alex couldn't bear it any longer. He opened the door and stepped into the living room with an unfamiliar resolve. Their eyes met, but only silence hung in the air. Claire sat there, not looking at him, her eyes vacant. And then, from a dark corner of the room, another figure stepped out, startling Alex. "Claire, is this how it is?" Alex's voice caught in his throat, each word he uttered carrying the weight of a shattered heart. Claire didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her eyes filled with tears, but not out of regret. Everything was clear now. A shock, a devastating blow, one he never saw coming. And in that moment, Alex knew, his marriage was over. Staring at Claire's silent form, Alex felt time rewind, taking him back to their early days together, the days when he never could have imagined something like this would happen. They met in college, their first glance exchanged in a dreamy classroom filled with youthful hope. Claire was beautiful, confident, and always the center of attention. Alex remembered the day she sat next to him in that empty classroom, her long, shiny hair and radiant smile shining like the sun. He never imagined that just one look from her would change his life forever. Their relationship grew quickly, like a fairy tale romance. They shared long nights, discussing their future, their dreams, and their plans for life. They laughed and talked about the travels they hadn't yet taken, the children they wanted to have. Claire was the perfect wife in Alex's eyes, the one he thought would stand by his side for the rest of his life. But life is never what we expect. After their wedding, they faced challenges no one could prepare for. Alex, with his passion for work and his drive for success, spent too much time focused on his career. Long days at the office, meetings that stretched into the night, caused him to slowly forget the important moments at home. Claire, though understanding of her husband, began to feel isolated. She started noticing the gaps in her heart, the long nights spent alone in their large house. Nights when Alex left early and came home late, unanswered calls, unreturned texts. By the time Alex started noticing the signs, it was too late. Claire was no longer the woman who had loved him so deeply at the start. She didn't look at him with the same warmth, instead, her eyes now reflected weariness and indifference. One night, when Alex returned from a late meeting, he overheard Claire talking on the phone. It was a long conversation, and she was laughing, enjoying herself with someone. Claire's long hair and her smiling face were reminiscent of old memories, but this time, those smiles weren't for him. Alex faintly realized that, amidst the growing distance in their marriage, a third figure had quietly slipped in. He didn't want to believe his own thoughts, but the truth was slowly revealing itself. Claire had met Ryan, an old friend of Alex's, a confident, charismatic man with an almost magnetic charm. Ryan had always harbored a secret affection for Claire, but it wasn't until they reunited at a party that their relationship truly began to evolve. When Claire started having secret meetings and going out without telling Alex, he began to feel like he was living in a different world, a world he couldn't control and, worse, couldn't even understand. The conflict within him began to explode. He felt abandoned, deceived, and, most painfully, betrayed by the one person he had devoted his life to. Alex tried to find a reason, a way to salvage their relationship. But as he witnessed Claire coming home late time and time again, as her excuses grew increasingly unconvincing, he could no longer pretend everything was fine. One day, when he went through Claire's phone, everything became painfully clear. The texts, the calls from Ryan, it all fueled the fire burning inside him. Unable to wait any longer, Alex decided to confront the truth, knowing full well that it would destroy everything he had built. When he looked into Claire's eyes, Alex didn't just see regret, he saw a silence that cut deeper than any words could. She couldn't deny it any longer. She had been unfaithful, and the affair had lasted longer than Alex had imagined. Everything in his world seemed to collapse before him, and in that moment, he didn't know what to do. He only knew that his life, everything he had believed in, had changed forever. Since their relationship began to fracture, Claire had become someone different. The long nights when Alex wasn't around, the times she went out without explanation, everything made Alex feel like he was standing on the outside of his own life. He couldn't pinpoint the cause, but there was an undeniable feeling growing inside him, something had changed. And that something was the silence Claire carried, a silence full of pain and distance. That day, Alex decided to come home early, hoping to have a conversation with Claire, to try to fix what had been broken. He thought that maybe, just maybe, a candid conversation could set them back on the path to a happy family. But when he arrived home, everything only made the uneasy feeling in him stronger. The large house, once full of laughter, was now eerily silent. Claire was nowhere to be found, her car absent from its usual spot in the driveway. He texted her, but received no reply. The feeling of anxiety had been creeping up for some time, but today, it was impossible to shake. He couldn't pretend that everything was okay anymore. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from Claire: "I'm at a cafe with an old friend, will be home late." The message seemed harmless enough, but Alex felt a strange restlessness. This wasn't as simple as it seemed. He had grown used to Claire's silences, but this time, he couldn't accept it. The unease gnawed at him, and he decided to do something he had never done before: follow her. Not because he didn't trust her, but because of an inexplicable gut feeling. He drove to the cafe Claire had mentioned. When he arrived, he saw her car parked in a secluded spot. But it didn't end there. As Alex stepped into the cafe, he could hardly believe his eyes. Claire sat in a dark corner, not alone. Beside her was Ryan, an old friend Alex knew all too well. They were talking, laughing, completely unaware that Alex was standing right at the door. While nothing overtly inappropriate was happening, the way they looked at each other, the way they laughed, it was clear to Alex that something wasn't right. Ryan was holding Claire's hand, a lingering touch. That wasn't the behavior of old friends. The anger inside Alex flared. He stepped into the cafe, his cold eyes fixed on them. Claire jerked back, releasing Ryan's hand, and stood up. Ryan couldn't hide his own discomfort. The air grew heavy, as if a storm was about to break. "Alex, you're home early." Claire tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "Home early? Weren't you supposed to be at home?" Alex's voice was icy, void of any forgiveness. He looked at Ryan, then back at Claire, the feeling of betrayal hitting him like a punch to the chest, making him choke on his own breath. Claire lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Her words faltered. Alex didn't want to hear any explanations, it was all too clear now. "Do you know, Claire," Alex began, his voice trembling with anger but still resolute. "I've felt something was wrong for a long time. But I didn't expect it to happen this soon. You and Ryan, what have you done?" Claire couldn't answer. She stood still, her eyes filled with tears, but not from regret. Ryan, now, stood up, preparing to face Alex. But Alex didn't even look at him, his eyes fixed on his wife. "You don't need to explain anything," Alex said. "What you need to do now is face the truth. I can't live in this lie anymore. Don't think I don't know everything." The tension in the air was thick, as if it could be sliced with a knife. In that moment, Claire was no longer the wife Alex had loved. She was no longer the woman he had trusted. Everything had shattered, and he could feel the irreparable fracture in their marriage. Tears began to fall from Claire's eyes, but Alex no longer had the patience to care. He turned and walked out of the cafe, not looking back. What had been lost, would never be regained. Claire could only stand there, silently in an empty space, realizing that everything she once had was slipping through her fingers. Alex could not turn back. The feeling of betrayal overtook him, like a violent wave crashing over everything he knew. The image of Claire and Ryan together replayed over and over in his mind, like an unhealed wound. He drove aimlessly, not sure where he was headed, just knowing that he had to get away from that place, away from the things that were choking him. Anger rose again, making his grip on the steering wheel tighten to the point of pain. Everything inside him felt like a ticking time bomb, just one more push and it would explode. Why Ryan? The man he had once considered a brother. The one who had stood by him during the hardest moments of his life. He never imagined that the one person he trusted so deeply would betray him so mercilessly. And Claire, his wife, the one he had poured all his love and sacrifices into, how could she so easily give her heart to someone else? His anger surged like a flood, sweeping away all the reasoning he had tried to hold on to. After driving aimlessly for a while, Alex stopped his car on a desolate street. The night had fallen, the world around him eerily still, the only sounds the wind and the fading hum of the engine. He sat in the car, hands still gripping the wheel, eyes squeezed shut, breathing deeply as if trying to find some peace within himself. But it was impossible. Nothing felt peaceful anymore. Everything had changed, forever. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, a message from Claire. He opened it, and immediately the words sent a fresh wave of anger surging through him. "Alex, you don't understand. I'm sorry. I still love you." The apology was worthless. It was like a painful blow to his heart, deepening the already unbearable wound. Unable to sit still any longer, Alex drove back home. When he arrived, the air around him felt heavy, filled with sadness and tension. He walked into the house, where the only sound was the echo of his footsteps. Claire hadn't returned yet, but he knew she would. She would certainly come back. He had no patience left, and in that moment, he decided he had to do something. A noise came from outside the door, and Claire entered. She saw him standing there, her eyes red, an expression of exhaustion and tension on her face. But then she stopped, as if sensing the change in the air. Alex looked her straight in the eye, no greeting, no embrace. He couldn't endure the lies any longer. "Claire," he said, his voice cold, "do you think you can fix everything by just saying sorry? Do you think you can come back, and everything will be okay? You and Ryan, everything you've done. Do you really think I'll just let it go?" Claire stood frozen, her eyes filled with confusion, and a hint of fear. She stepped toward Alex, but he backed away, as though she were a stranger. "I don't want to hear any more apologies," he said, each word slicing through the air. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You shattered everything I trusted. And I can't live in this false marriage anymore." Claire's emotions were clear on her face. She stepped closer to him, but Alex turned his face away, unwilling to look at her any longer. "I love you," Claire said, but Alex no longer believed her words. They were just empty phrases, not enough to make up for her actions. With a swift motion, Alex grabbed his wallet and threw it onto the table. "This is everything you wanted. You've taken away my love, my trust, and our family. You can keep it all, Claire. I don't need anything." He turned away, not daring to look back. The pain and disappointment overwhelmed him. He had lost everything. Claire watched him walk away, her eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't do anything but stand still, feeling the destruction of everything around her. Confronting the truth, she knew she had lost everything. But the price had been too great, and now all she could do was watch, unable to change anything. Alex stepped outside, taking a deep breath. Everything was over, but the pain wouldn't fade easily. He knew this was the moment to close one chapter of his life. This marriage was over, but for him, life was just beginning. Alex stepped out of the house he had once called a home, the ground beneath him feeling unsteady, as if the very earth had betrayed him. The streetlights flickered in the dark night, reflecting the emptiness in his heart, weary, shattered, and hollow. Everything he had built over the years now lay in ruins, a pile of ashes that could never be salvaged. It wasn't that he didn't love Claire anymore, it was the betrayal that had stolen every feeling, every shred of trust he had invested in her. Nothing could heal this wound, neither love nor late apologies. He didn't turn back to look at the house. He didn't pause to dwell on the past. He knew, no matter how painful it was, he had to walk away, had to leave behind the past to rediscover himself. The years of living in lies had been enough. He could no longer live in the shadow of regret. He had to start over, even though it wouldn't be easy. A few days later, Alex moved out into a small, cozy apartment, simple, with no trace of Claire or their shared memories. This apartment, though not luxurious, brought him the peace he had longed for. Every morning, he woke up with a sense of freedom. No more worrying about arguments, suspicions, or hidden secrets. Though the wound in his heart was still fresh, at least he was beginning to step out of the darkness. Lily, his daughter, was the only reason he felt he had something worth fighting for. She was the last hope in him, the reason he fought to keep moving forward, to rebuild his life. Even though Lily, too, was filled with questions and pain from witnessing the breakdown of their family, she understood that her father was doing what was right. Alex always made time for Lily, not wanting her to feel a lack of love. And in the darkest of days, it was she who helped him find the light amidst the shadows. After Alex left, Claire no longer tried to contact him. She had tried, step by step, to save their relationship, but every effort was met with rejection. The last time she called, it was nothing more than a dry apology, a few broken explanations, none of which could change anything. Alex had made it clear to himself, nothing could replace the trust that had been lost. Finally, as Alex's life began to stabilize, he started focusing on his work, something he had neglected before. He no longer chased distant dreams or meaningless sacrifices. He understood that happiness didn't always come from what others wanted, but from living true to oneself, accepting what had happened, and learning to rise again. A year later, Alex ran into Ryan at a bar where he had once hung out with friends. Ryan saw him and approached with a worried look on his face. But Alex no longer felt anything for this man. He didn't want confrontation or revenge. He simply looked at Ryan, no longer angry or resentful. He understood that Ryan's betrayal was just one part of the series of events that had led him down this path. "I don't care about you anymore," Alex said briefly, then turned and walked away. A sense of relief washed over him, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Time continued to pass. Alex no longer lived in the shadows of the past, no longer hiding his pain. He began to learn how to love himself again, how to live without needing someone else to complete him. The peaceful days slowly returned, and in his heart, though the wound hadn't fully healed, it no longer hurt as it once had. He understood that life was a series of changes, choices, and sometimes, letting go was the only way forward. With each step, Alex felt freer. And one day, as he saw Lily grow up, he knew he had done the right thing. His relationship with Claire had ended, but his life was still moving forward. And perhaps, that was the most important thing of all. In today's video, we follow Alex, a man whose life is shattered after discovering his wife Claire's betrayal with his old friend Ryan. Struggling with the pain of betrayal, Alex decides to leave his home, start over in a new apartment, and focus on rebuilding his life for the sake of his daughter, Lily. Despite Claire's attempts to salvage their relationship, Alex moves on, learning to live for himself and accepting the changes in his life. A year later, Alex encounters Ryan, but he has no anger left, choosing to let go of the past and embrace his newfound freedom.